All right. Hey, Scott, how are you doing on this fine Corpus Christi day?
Oh, Jerry, I could not be better, sir. And I just want to say up front, thank you for letting me hang out with you this afternoon.
Oh, yeah. It's a blast to have somebody from the Llama Lounge lounging with us as we have a conversation with Reina Rose, calling in from Arizona.
That's right.
And then I was like, what part of Arizona? Popped in.
Flagstaff.
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 Part.
Yeah.
The mountains. If I get out of breath, that's why.
Oh, yes. we put her in, well, you should almost be acclimated, I guess. You said you'd been there a couple of weeks. And
Almost 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should be acclimated soon. But it's really great to be on the show with you guys. And, as we were saying, sometimes the best conversations happen before and after. We've already been having just a great conversation. And it's wonderful to spend this weekend here with you.
yeah, that's what I love about like the good conversations. It's like, oh, wait, hold on, guys. Let me hit record. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we can go.
What you were about to say sounds important. Please pause for a second while I hit the record button.
Now continue. I lost my train of thought. Dang it. No.
It's funny. Before I had a show, I remember just having conversations with friends and being like, I wish we had recorded this and made this a podcast, because what we're talking about is something I wish I would have learned or listened to 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And so I think it's so great that we're in this age of podcasting
Yeah.
where conversations that could be beneficial to the you 10 years ago, there is someone out there that's that you 10 years ago
Yeah.
that really needs to hear this. And so I just love that this kind of thing is available in our day and age.
Yeah.
I think that's how most of us got started, actually. I mean, we I know for my crew with the Llama Lounge, it was just great conversations we were having already. And somebody got the idea to just hit a record button and takes off a little bit.
Yeah. I know for me, the original show I had, Family Time Q&A, it was kind of twofold. One, I wanted to demonstrate what like authentic manhood looked like. What does it look like when there's a man who isn't so machismo, that he can actually take a what do you call it, being called out, or by his own
Yeah.
family, and how does he handle that in a way that's loving, yet fatherly or husbandly, if that's a word, husbandly. Anyway.
I'm
It is
actually
now.
really touched by that, especially like, not to harp on it, but with your military background of
Yeah.
like, we are military, we're right, and we do things right. And then to be like, and I can receive the feedback that I may not want to hear
Yeah.
from people who are closest to me. And it might hurt the most to hear it, but I really need to. And so that leap from one extreme to the other, I really applaud you for. Where can we listen to that, by the way?
It's still on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. It's Family Time Q&A. It's a nice big logo. You'll see a family of 4 in stick figures, and one of them's a ballerina because that's my daughter.
Oh, cute.
And so yeah, she's my. Oddly enough, the mini me and my family is the little girl. The personality. Like when you see us side by side, you're like, that's her dad.
Yeah.
Or that's his daughter.
Daddy's little girl. I mean,
Yeah. Oh man! Sometimes when my wife and my brother, not my brother, well him too, but my son, her brother, Emma's brother, when they don't understand Emma, they just kind of turn to me for like translation. I'm like, well, what she's saying is this, this, and this. How does that not make sense? Like, what? You guys are so
sounds
weird.
perfectly clear to me.
Yeah.
It's
So-
amazing too how we have these different languages, not even love languages, but even just, the ways we express ourselves,
Yeah.
that and that's where, having that openness to someone's perspective and someone's way of communicating is just as wonderful, even if it's not something we get or understand, because I think that's a lot of what is causing so much strife in our world right now is you don't do it like me, so you're wrong.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sometimes you're even trying to make the same point in a different way. And so then, I'm right, you're wrong, and vice versa.
I'd say more than half my arguments are myself and the other person. We agree on the point that's being discussed, but somehow I'm wrong. And I'm like, how am I wrong?
How
We're
am I
saying
wrong?
the same thing with different words. And they're like, no, you're fundamentally wrong. I'm like, seriously, you believe in this. I also believe in the same thing. And they're like, why are we yelling at each other? I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
Right.
It's
I
amazing.
think that's so much of the world's problems, truly. I mean, when we really look at each other as humans who want the best things for ourselves, our families, our world, and maybe we're coming at it from different angles, but if we could look at the other human as saying, okay, you also want the best for yourself, your family, your world, and it's not what I think is best. Let me get curious. why do you think that's best? And maybe you can get curious about me, why I think that's best. And neither of our answers are best, but a culmination of us getting curious and coming up with something that's way better between the two. You know, and then we'd all live in the fruits of the Spirit and heaven on earth in peace.
Right.
But,
That's right. It's like if I'm expected to go out and spread the gospel and demonstrate what Christianity looks like, debating people on these minute issues and details, that's not the way to do it. All it does is push people away. And so it is important. It's huge to listen to different perspectives. And it's like, if you've ever been on a debate club or taken a speech class, they always tell you to examine all sides of a topic, so you can learn a little bit about it. That way, when you do present your perspective, you can tie it into what they believe as well, and you actually gain a connection that way.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny because I talk a lot about this in my book, and to people who get it, I say, you know, it's kind of written to two audiences. One, the people who've been hurt by this coming at the church in a way that you have to debate every little issue and who's right and who's wrong and who's moralistic and who's not. But it's written to those people who are like hurt by that, but also the people who are still in it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And to people who will get it, I'm like, it's kind of like how to be a Christian without being an a-hole, you know, if we can say that here. You know? Because unfortunately, I talk to so many people who maybe they even want to go to church, but they've just been around too many like born agains who are judgier than they've ever been.
Right.
You know, just worse to be around, like worse humans than they were ever before, that they almost want them to go back to being like wretched sinners that like at least know it, you know? But if we could all, and again, my book's Sin Tastes Good, right? You know, like, which gets ultimately to the point that the healthier we get spiritually, it doesn't. But that's the salacious title to reel people in, or make them embarrassed to read on the plane like Jerry.
Yes. We were talking about that before we hit record, that I read it about a week or two ago. And I mean, it's got the apple, and then it's got like red blood dripping down the bottom of it. It looks like a murder mystery novel cover, and it says "Sin Tastes Good." And I had like the thing, like I nobody can see what I'm doing with my hands other than the two of you, and so I'm holding the book up in front of my face like I normally do, and then it just kind of hit me like, everybody can see me reading this book that says "Sin Tastes Good," and all of a sudden I'm like tilting the book forward so people can't see what I'm reading, but I'm still reading, and I'm like, wait, nobody on this plane knows who I am. Just keep reading. But yeah,
you
had that's kind of.
You had to bust out the 8th grade
book covers.
Book cover, the brown back book cover.
Yes. Put a brown paper back. But honestly, that's kind of the gist of the book too, is like, stop worrying what it looks like and start living authentically, whatever that is, you know. And we talked earlier about, you know, my experience of moving back from the island of Borneo, and, you know, everything becoming about what kind of shoes you wear and what kind of music you listen to, and fitting the mold. And so I think even reading the book is a daring act if you're doing it in public in some ways, but it's to bring about that daring act of speaking up for someone who's maybe getting like morally chastised in the church, you know. And I talk about, I know that you probably read it, Jerry. If you've ever heard of what's it called? A privilege walk. Have you heard of that? Yeah. And so in a privilege walk, you know, they'll put people from the community that are obviously on different ends of the privilege spectrum. And they'll ask them questions such as, you know, have you ever had to skip a meal not voluntarily? And the people who have not had to skip a meal, you know, other than voluntarily, get to take a step forward. And each question of privilege, they get another step forward, another step forward. Well, of course, they're nearly to the finish line. And then they say, okay, race each other. Of course, like the person that's still at the starting line is not going to win, or, you know, it's going to have a really tough time. And I feel like we do this so much within the church. You know, some people are so blessed to grow up in this wonderful God-fearing home that taught them right and wrong from the very beginning, and help them to understand not just right and wrong, but why and how it affects your soul, and not that it's just a rule, you know, but the heart of it. And others, you know, came from a background completely opposite, you know, are maybe entrenched in some moral sins, but but maybe they actually have better hearts than certain people on the other end. And that's what God measures. And so we measure, though, in the church sometimes like, oh my gosh, that person hasn't quit smoking yet. They must not really be a Christian or saved, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, that person got addicted when they were 12 and they're like 30 and they're doing their best, but God will help them as things go on, you know, like, but we morally measure sometimes actions that are what Richard Rohr, and he's a little bit whatever people think of him, but he talks about sins of weakness versus sins of the heart. And Jesus never chastised the sins of weakness. The woman caught in adultery, you know, all these things, he never got on those people. But the sins of the heart, like the Pharisees who were hard-hearted and trying to make people jump through all these hoops, those are the only people, or the people, you know, the money changers trying to cheat people. Those are the only people he ever like had harsh words with. Never the people who were just trying to do their best in life and weak.
I never thought about that.
Well,
Yeah,
and it goes back to the whole, you know, the beam in your eye versus the speck in someone else's eye. None of us as human beings, none of us are flawless. Like we're all sinful creatures by nature. And the Bible doesn't necessarily say, well, this sin has a little bit higher than this one. And no, you know, so we really shouldn't be trying to out church people. And that's something I use a lot. Like, I'm a better church member than you are. I'm like, no, that's not the way it is. I mean, Paul writes, I have finished my race, or the course set before me, not I'm finishing my race and that person's race and we're competing against each other. No, it's everyone has their own race that they're, you know, that's laid out before them. Yeah. And I think sometimes if we're too busy being preoccupied with maybe that person's not faithful enough to the church, or that person's not pulling their weight, we're losing sight on our relationship with God, and we're putting it on worrying about what other people are doing.
Absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of the guilt and shame comes in, you know, because we're taught to feel really, really guilty or really shameful for sins. And of course, like we feel bad and we repent and we do our best to turn the other direction. But some of the feedback I've gotten from readers who you know, have reached out to me, I didn't know them before, was that there's a part in the book, and I talk about, you know, even while writing this book, I fell into one of my old sinful habits, and I came back the next day because every day I would pray that the Holy Spirit writes through me and that it would just be what people need to hear. And I remember getting in my prayer journal and saying, like, God, I'm not worthy to write this for you. I'm not worthy to have you speak through me. And he gently reminded me, did you think you were before? Do you think I love you any more or less now? Are you any less my child because you messed up? And someone told me they read that and God had put a project on their heart, like for him. And they had been putting it off for years and years. And they said when they read that and God said the same thing into their heart, it just helped lift that guilt and shame off of a sin that was like 10 years ago, that they felt unworthy to do this project for God. And so that's where I feel like we shouldn't just be flippant about sin, of course.
Sure.
But when we sit and let that guilt and shame of our past sins hold us back, you know, it was the very next day that God told me, did you think you were any different today versus yesterday? You know, and it's all about that repentant heart, of course, too. You know, I wasn't being flippant about it. I was being like, God, I don't even deserve to do this. And he's like, I know, I still chose you to do it.
Well, and if you think about it too, we wouldn't have much of a Christianity if God only selected perfect people to fulfill his will. You know, it's if you when you read through the Bible, you learn about all the mistakes and all the sin and how people through God were able to overcome that. And that's in right parts of the Bible, and go out and preach the gospel to the world. If he just selected perfect people, like I said, we wouldn't be here. None of us would be here.
Absolutely. You know, I'm reading 1st and 2nd Samuel right now, just in my scripture reading, and David, like, I mean, I've always known Bathsheba, blah, 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 but like even the situation with Michal, his first wife, Saul's daughter, I'm like, it's kind of messed up. Like, she's with this husband that loves her so much, he weeps after her. And And David's like, I paid the bride price, give her back to me, and then like never sleeps with her again, like at the point where she gets upset with him about the dancing. But I'm like, man, that's so messed up. And then like, I'm actually in the part just past Bathsheba right now, but there was so much more to that. And I'm like, this is a man after God's own heart. And he messes up again and again and again. And is forgiven again and again, and extended grace again and again. And like even right now, he's actually in the parenting where, his one son rapes the other daughter, and like he basically does nothing about it. And it's again just showing his humanity and how he fails at things, and he's the one called a man after God's own heart. And so again, a lot of what I speak about is just don't be flippant, but don't sit and wallow in your guilt and allow that to keep you from doing the great things God's called you to.
Sure. Yeah. Great perspective.
Even if those great things like don't seem great to our world, I think that's really important too. It's something I've been speaking out a lot lately. I had a friend attempt suicide in a way that should have worked and didn't. And, I've been thinking a lot about, this was a person who, or is a person, thank God, who was never like that ambitious, go get it, I'm gonna change the whole world kind of person, but has always been like the sweet, loving, I'm gonna help every person in my path kind of person. Probably never made more than $30,000 their whole life in a year, and circumstances just piled on her, and she just felt, I mean, there's a lot of complexity to that I will never even know, but almost unworthy for this world, like, and on top of debts from going to college to try to help people, like 6-figure debts. And I'm like, we need, because she wanted to be a naturopathic doctor, and that costs 6-figure debts of college debt. And, I'm thinking we need to really applaud people in this world who do not meet our Western standard of success. And we need to remind them how valuable they are, because this woman who I'm talking about, who's been one of my best friends since we were teenagers, all she wants to do is help the world. But this society we live in seemed to have no place for her,
Yeah. Yeah. I teach a college and career age Sunday school class at my church, and it's one of the most unique groups, that demographic. They have tough situations because they're trying to navigate their Christian life, but yet they work in the world and they go to school in the world. And so they're, where are the priorities? Are they expected to impress a coworker or impress a friend or impress a boss? And the challenge is, it's like there's that reality that they're in the world, so the world has these expectations, but I'm trying to teach them, hey, here's how you navigate all that from a biblical perspective. And sometimes I have to let them know that the world is always going to let you down. The world is always going to have expectations for you, and you're never going to meet them.
Yeah, they're always going to be too much.
Whatever, if it's, this degree is going to be fantastic for your career, that's fantastic. But there's always going to be somebody with a higher degree. There's always going to be someone that makes more money. There's always going to be somebody with the latest brand of Jordans or whatever. So the perspective that I try to share is, what does the Bible say about humility? What does the Bible say about work ethic? What does the Bible say about loving your neighbor? And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's where our focus should be at, because none of us make it out alive. Just
what? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I need to look this up. Hold on.
Yeah. We all have an expiration date. We all have an expiration date, right?
Is it Elijah or Elisha who got to walk into heaven?
Yeah, one of those guys got a ticket straight there.
Yeah.
Oh man. And that other guy in the Old Testament, in Genesis.
Yeah. It's happened twice in the Bible.
Yeah.
But I want to speak to what you were saying. I think when we really look at it, and this is the hardest thing to do, and really a lot of what I talk about when I speak, when I write, is simplifying it. Jesus constantly talks about going back to the one thing. You know, he says, seek the kingdom of heaven and all this will fall into place. He says, Mary focused on the one thing. Martha, you're worried about so many things. And there, I just actually read the chapter for the audiobook where I talk about, you know, Martha didn't know that just another chapter or so later, Jesus was going to feed thousands with a small boy's lunch. So he didn't need the dinner she was trying so hard to make for him. He didn't need what she was going to give, but she needed what he had to give, and she was missing it to try to, like you said, live up to the world standards, do it as good, you know, the best, and live up to the expectation of, I've got this amazing man in my house who's also God. But the one thing she needed was what Mary was doing. And that was really absorbing the message of God and being in his presence. And that's one thing I talk a lot about, contemplative prayer and really sitting with God and listening for answers, because my prayer life used to be a lot of giving God like a laundry list of my problems and then telling him how to fix them. You know, because I know best. Just in case you needed a hint, God, here's how you fix that.
and how'd that work out for you?
Right, yeah, not so well. And so, you know, I've learned over, you know, spending time with monks in Catholic monasteries and some really amazing teachers over the years, to sit in that silence and wait upon the Lord and grow stronger and listen to those answers. And we discussed a little bit before the show, that's why I even have a show right now, is because I listened to that answer. But being in his presence and seeking the one thing, seeking the kingdom, all those other things that need to be will fall into place. Maybe not in our timing, maybe not how we expected or what we thought it would look like, but it's so hard because it's so backward to our Western way of thinking that I need to hustle, I need to, and it doesn't mean we're lazy. So there's fine lines between all of this, you know, but feeling like I need to do it all in my own strength and I need to hustle and I need to, when really I need to seek the one thing. And God will give me the wisdom for the actions I need to do on the other. And then his burden is easy and his yoke is light. And it's not so much this hard hustle, but it's a flow and an ease that is not always, it doesn't mean it doesn't have its difficulties, you know, hard decisions, but it's not this constant uphill battle that so many of us are experiencing, because that's the world we live in. The world we live in says hustle at all costs, work 7 days a week, do everything you can to amass your billions. And then, you know, I'm nothing wrong with that. I love billions. It's good. But, you know, like and it's not the money or the things, it's the love of those things, right?
Yeah.
Right.
When we have our love in the right place, when we have our love sought on the one thing, the other things, they just fall into place. Because God, you know, the Bible also says that he delights in giving us the desires of our heart.
Yes.
So we don't have to worry that it's going to, there was a really great pastor, I think it was actually Chuck Smith Sr., who said to a group of missionaries and some other people, and he says, you know, don't fear God's plan for you, because he's not going to send you into the bush unless you like bugs. And all the women ran out of the room, and he thought he offended them, right? And they came back a few minutes later, and they had their little trays, you know, that have the bugs stuck in them.
Oh, sure.
I don't even know what those are called.
With the butterflies and
with the butterflies and and they came back and showed him like, oh yeah, we like bugs, and we were sent to the bush. We're these missionary wives. And like, you know, I think we sometimes fear the will of God, thinking, oh no, it's not my own. But at the same time, we also have to remember he delights in giving us the desires of our hearts. And the desires of our hearts might change, and that's okay. But he's not going to send us to the bush unless we like bugs.
I was in a similar conversation the other day about like using your strengths and your talents, because they are God-given, to do the thing that you're supposed to do. And it just kind of hit me. It's like, yeah, why would he give you these gifts of these talents, but then say, you know, Jerry, you're gifted in, I don't know, putting together a lesson plan, but I want you to go over there and I want you to do coding for a new website. What? Like, he's not going to send you to do that. He's going to be like, Jerry, I'm going to send you forth to teach people about blank.
I think we have to look at Joseph for that though too, because oftentimes, you know, he prepares us and he gives us all these things, and it's not in our timing. You know, we looked at Joseph, it's like 20, 30 years later that he really gets to, you know, along the way he's doing steps, but then, you know, he's constantly taking these backslides too. And you're like, WTF, God, like what's going on here, right? And so, I think we have to remember that there's also those moments where we feel like it's a backslide. But Joel Osteen, I love him, even if some people, whatever people think of him, he says, that setback is a setup for what God's got for you next. And really, if we look at Joseph, even going to prison was that set up to be in front of the king. And so we have to remember that though his yoke is easy and his burden is light, and he will use our gifts. Like these are promises. He is faithful. There will be those moments of backslide, and they may be the, set up for what's coming next, but it will not feel like that in the moment. It will feel hard in that moment. And we may even experience what Mother Teresa called like a dark night of the soul, where it feels like God's not with us and he's not in this season, but remain faithful to that one thing, to chasing after the kingdom of heaven and time with him. And it will pan out, even if it's 2 years in what feels like a prison.
Yeah.
In your book, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and sometimes that's just God's reminder of, hey, I'm up here. You're taking your sights off of me, and I'm letting you know how bad it can be without me.
Yeah. In Joseph Caves, we really see he learns discretion, because he didn't have that with his brothers in the beginning. Like, hey guys, you're going to bow down to me. Aren't you excited? And, by the end, his brothers come back and he's like testing them to see if their hearts have changed, and not revealing who he is until the right moment. He really learned discretion over that period of time.
Yeah.
Jerry, what were you going to say about the book?
Oh, I was thinking about just what you both have been talking about. Something you talk about in your book is, what we need is nourishment for our souls, like some good, hearty food. But what a lot of us tend to seek is that fast food. And, maybe think about the book title again, Sin Tastes Good. And you talk about there are two selves that are kind of at play for nourishment from within ourselves. Like there's our true self, and then there's our fake self. So our soul versus our ego. I just wanted to throw that out there and see what y'all wanted to say about that. Worst question ever.
I mean, honestly, sin is easy, and it feels good for a moment, right? And so like the title of the book, sin tastes good till you have a stomach ache from overeating. So that's and the Bible tells you that it's fun for a season, or it's enjoyable for a season, but eventually there's going to be suffering that follows along with it.
So you say that, Scott, and there's actually a section in the book called Donuts and the Meaning of Life. And I talk about, since I was a teenager, like I got pretty healthy as a teenager. Like my family life in the beginning, it was like more pizza and licorice, and just that's what I was raised around. But then I started being like, I don't think that's what's good for me. And I started developing healthy habits. Well, when I did, I remember my architecture teacher, he would bring donuts to class. And I was like, oh yeah, donuts sounds good. And they always look really beautiful. And so I'd eat one. And about 20 minutes later, I'd start looking around, raising my hand to go to the bathroom, because it was like, that creature from Alien that comes out of the stomach was like starting to crawl out of my stomach, because this like sugar, grease, and gluten, like I just wasn't used to it anymore. And so, and it's happened to me, high school was a while ago, but like throughout these decades, where every once in a while I'm like, that looks so beautiful. I think I want a donut. And 20 minutes later, I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I eat a donut? And so the same is true with sin. And the whole point of the book gets to this, is that it may still look pretty and frosting and sprinkles and, but eventually, I mean, I probably haven't eaten a donut now in at least a decade. Eventually you get to a point where you see the sin, and as glazed and beautiful as it may still appear, the bellyache, and it before you eat the fruit, and I go back to the creation story. But speaking into what you were talking about, Jerry, about the true and false self too, we all have this true self that is before culture, before, society telling us what we should be or want to be, or even our parents and the expectations placed on us. And it builds this almost shell around us of what we think we are, right? And we think, maybe I think I am my job. I think I am my heritage, I think I am, whatever the things might be, that is not the truest part of us, the soul, right? Free of ego that needs to identify with, that's that true self. And that true self's the part that really connects to the one thing, right?
Mhm.
The seeking the kingdom of God. And as we seek the kingdom of God, more of that false self, that ego, that, I need to make this much money, I need to have these kind of titles, I need to, whatever the ego wants, begins to fall away. And it's not something, sometimes we can't even identify it on our own, because we're so engrossed in our culture, so engrossed in our society, so engrossed in, well, I need to make this much because I have this many bills, right? Which there are practical things, like we cannot separate matter from spirit. I mean, and that's another thing I mentioned in the book, is that when Paul talks about the flesh, many theologians believe he's really talking about the egoic self as the flesh, because if human bodies were bad, Jesus would not have incarnated into one. God would have not made us flesh and called it good if this skin we live in is bad. This isn't bad. It's the fleshly desires, the egoic, I need to be this to look that way. That is what Paul's talking about. And so we cannot separate matter from spirit, and matter matters to God and to us. And so, where I totally encourage people, I run classes for the orphans I work with in Russia on how to be good with their finances and how to build businesses and things like that, because that's important. And it's important in the Bible. It's when we obsess over that. It's when we become obsessed with making more and looking better. And that's that egoic false self. So I hope that answers for you that false and true self. Where the true self, you think of Mother Teresa, if you think of like a true self, someone who really got there and really doesn't care what people think, doesn't seek accolades, doesn't seek possessions. And that doesn't mean we don't have possessions. I think people get very too extreme on this, thinking, well, if I just am poor, then I'm more godly. And that's not true.
Exactly. Yeah.
He calls us to be the lenders and not the borrowers.
That's right.
Top and not the bottom. And so, but that's the great thing about the Bible. It's just as mysterious as Christ himself. The disciples who spent years walking with him day in and day out still didn't understand him, because he was a mystery. And so are scriptures. And so I think it's so important. We talked about earlier, not being like, I'm right, you're wrong, I know the one answer and you don't. The Bible is mysterious, and God reveals these mysteries to us over time. Sometimes he doesn't. And to rest in the beauty of, we'll never have it all figured out, and that's okay. I think we'd have a much more peaceful world if we could all do that.
Yeah.
Nice. Now I know that, so you've got your book, Sin Tastes Good. And that's been out, how has that been out anyway?
November 2020. So it came out in the middle of the pandemic.
It was new. Okay. I'm like,
yeah.
Wait, is this? Yeah.
I know. I've been wanting to go on a book tour, and I'm looking to do one soon. It's just, things opening up. In Texas, I can go book tour all I want.
Yeah.
Not everywhere else I want to go. It's still pretty closed.
Oh gosh. Yeah. We're going to find out if that was a good idea or not pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's so confusing, and it's been so politicized. It's hard to get truth in
some clarification
in this day and age. And again, that's where we rest into the one thing, rest into the mystery.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Do the best you can. Vaccinate, don't vaccinate. Believe it's a hoax, don't. I mean, I hope you don't believe it's completely a hoax, but but I have also questioned, I live in California half the time, and we're like totally locked down, everything, nothing open. And Florida's been open the whole time, and we have pretty much the same numbers.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, there's something a little off here.
Yeah.
And I want to serve people and make them comfortable. If that means wearing a mask around them, that's fine. When I come see my grandma, I'm like masked up the first couple days just in case, because I won't take that chance on her.
Right.
Yeah.
On me, I'm like, I can go. But when it's her, I'm like, I actually finally got vaccinated. I was really not sure about that. And I'm like, if it saves my grandma, then I'm doing it.
And not to make the entire episode about the pandemic, but I see folks on both sides who, you know, again, like you said, it's been politicized, but as a good Christian, I should be focusing more on sharing the gospel than I should be yelling and screaming about my view on whether masks are saving the world or not. You know, it's like, what do people know me as? Do they know me as the mask or non-mask guy, or the vaccine or non-vaccine guy? Or do they know me as the guy that comes into work every day with a great attitude and a good spirit because I have Jesus, you know? So
yeah. And I think it comes down to loving your neighbor, you know,
Yeah.
like what is loving my neighbor the most, you know, without putting myself at risk. Because I honestly, I resisted getting a vaccine because I had a really bad reaction to that Gardasil vaccine for HPV that they gave people a long time. And I was married when they gave it to me. I didn't need it. And then I had like a bad reaction for like 10 years. And so I'm like, I was really resistant. But then again, I'm like, I can't hug my grandma. And that, I'm like, for me, it just became, okay, if I'm going to go on a tour, it'll make other people feel more comfortable. I'll be loving them. If I'm going to hug my grandma, you know, I need to make her safe and me safe. You know, her safe for me is more important because I'm like, at my age, most likely I'd probably get tired and lose my taste. But if I give it to her, that's a whole different story. So, you know, I think it really comes down to, we have personal choice, and how do we love our neighbor in that personal choice? And, you know, and see where they're comfortable. One thing I've always said, even with like the purity culture, is like, I think the minute you're going too far is the minute you stop loving the other person.
Right.
You know, the minute you start going after your own base desires and you stop loving that person and what they're comfortable with, that's too far. And for some people, that's holding their hand, and for some people, it's all kinds of things. But you know, like where our measure is where do we stop loving the other person? And so, you know, instead of politicizing it and saying, you know, I'm going to get 5G or whatever, you know, and maybe, but if I get embedded with 5G to hug my grandma and make people, you know, feel comfortable, then so be
I
it.
just realized that is one of the conspiracy theories out there. Like,
Yeah. I saw Ryan Reynolds when he was getting his, he said, "Oh, I have got 5G now."
Nanobots. They're getting us with nanobots. Those are too expensive. No, they're not.
I know. And I'm like, and I travel so much. So I'm like, at some point I'm going to have to get it anyway, probably. Yeah. So, but again, it's like, how am I loving the people around me? And
nice.
That's, even though I'm still also totally agree with, it's like a 98% recovery rate. And, you know, like you take more risk driving your car probably, especially at our age, you know, getting in a car and driving 3 hours is probably more of a risk. But again, at my grandma's age, it's this. So therefore I protect her. Yeah.
And we also just, I think we didn't want to become like Italy, you know, having people in the hallways and stuff like that. So I work for a healthcare organization. So I know that was one of the concerns we had is, do we have enough ventilators if it gets there? Do we have enough ICU beds? Enough,
Yeah, my boyfriend works compliance for a whole healthcare system. Yeah. And so, you know, I was here, you know, as far as like, I knew it wasn't just a conspiracy because I heard the nurses crying about the people they couldn't save. And, you know, the hospitals are overflowing. And again, I'm like, and why aren't Florida hospitals overflowing? Yeah. You know? And I think part of it, you know, like not to get too metaphysical, but you know, I really do think Jesus was the first metaphysicist, really. You know, he talks about what we believe becomes truth, and your faith has healed you. I do wonder if California being so crazy about coronavirus and so overreactive, if you will, and that if they get diagnosed, it's a death sentence to them. Where in Florida and Texas, if you get diagnosed, you're like, oh, cool, it's a good diet. I won't taste anything, you know? And I think, you know, just as the person, if they're told they have 3 months to live with cancer, they usually die unless they're a real fighter. Yeah. Because they were told that. I wonder if that's part of our overflowing hospitals. You know, a portion of it is that people believe it's a death sentence as soon as they get diagnosed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Huh. Yeah.
That's just my theory, you know, because again, I can't account for why, you know, Florida, who also has all the other states pouring into it and bringing stuff, would not be worse than we are in total lockdown over here. Yeah. And so I think your mental and your faith to how your body will respond really does determine how it will respond. Just as, Jesus doesn't go up to people and say, I healed you, aren't I amazing? He would always say, what you believed has happened. By your faith, you are healed.
Yes.
And the one guy whose son is, I believe is the demon possessed son. And he's like, can you heal my son? And Jesus goes, do you believe I can? And he says, help me with my unbelief. Because that was the major thing, is what do you believe? And so that's what I'm kind of wondering, could that be why some states who have more openness than others are doing better? Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, if we can rule out, or confirm like consistency in reporting. Yeah. All other things being equal. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Probably could.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. I know in Texas, we were reporting a lot of pneumonia cases at the beginning. So before we admitted there is an outbreak, I was like, yeah, but pneumonia is up 5 times than it's usually every year. Wait, what? Wait, isn't that one of the symptoms of COVID-19? And then so we started realizing maybe we should start testing. And so
and I know that I don't know, it's so hard with news these days, but I heard, who knows if it's true, that San Diego County had like 24 cases of the flu this year, where they usually have like several tens of thousands, you know?
Yeah.
And so, the reporting it's just hard to tell. And so at the end of the day, love your neighbor, do what's right for you, and don't hate another person for doing what's right for them. Yeah,
there we go. And now if people want to reach out to you, they want to follow your show, they want to check out your website, where can they go?
Sure. I love talking to people on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. So it's Reina Rose TV on Instagram, YouTube, most socials. I also have a website. It's www.reina-rose.com. It's Reina, if you're wondering how to spell Reina. And you can email me there. But again, I'm pretty active on Instagram if you have it. And I respond to everybody that writes in. So I love chatting with people. You can also catch my show. It's on my YouTube channel, Reina Rose TV. It's also on Roku TV and Amazon Fire Stick on the CTM News channel.
Nice.
Very cool.
Roku TV. Anyway, sorry, ADHD is now kicking in.
Roku.
Squirrel. Donuts.
Donuts.
Is that Roku? Is that anime? Is that what is that?
I do say it like it is anime. Roku.
Roku. I know. I don't even have Roku. I've only watched my show like on YouTube or on other people's Roku.
Yeah.
Or if other people have Amazon Fire Stick. And to let you know, it is hard to find. You have to search CTM News, and eventually you'll find my show Soul Nutrition within that channel.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay.
Soul Nutrition. Yeah.
Soul Nutrition. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Reina, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And Scott, thanks for filling in the seat as a guest host.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Jerry.